Cool, sounds good. So I'm Linus, as my website very clearly states. Um, I work on a bunch of stuff. So I primarily write and then work on side projects, which are sometimes like sort of web projects, little mini kind of web apps. Sometimes they're more technical and they're compilers or interpreters or things like that. So I guess we'll start with a few websites and then we'll sort of work our way down the list of projects. I haven't really thought through how to structure this in super amount of detail, and so we'll kind of see where the links take us. But I have I write a lot, and I have sort of three main websites that I write on. So this is my main one. It's like pretty text heavy. This is my main one. There's my blog over here, which a lot of people are familiar with. And then here's my list of projects, which are kind of the big parts of the website. And then I have a more technical blog, which is I have a programming language called Ink, which I'll probably get to later in this video. But this is a technical blog where here's a bunch of technical blog posts I've written about like random things that I've done that are more programmery. And then I have a site called Linus.coffee, which is basically what I think of as a Finsta, but a website. And so here's like random little vignettes of stories that I've written, art that I've made, music that I've made, and then like random other blog posts that I've written, but are too unpolished for me to put on the main blog. Um, and so that's kind of the main websites. All of these are really structured in the same way, which is like they have a bunch of posts, and each post they're all built on Hugo, um, which is the static site generator. If you use Jekyll, it's similar, but it's a little faster. And this in particular is a longer kind of website, so a faster static site generator definitely helps. So it's Hugo. It's a pretty bit of vanilla Hugo setup, and I have a custom template. Um, and I can see kind of how that works.
What's the lineage of these three sites? Did they all come up at the same time, or?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. I have a what's that blog called? Um, so I used to. This is like the third or fourth version of the site. My very first version of this website. Uh, I thought I had a screenshot of this post, but maybe not. My very first version of this website was like handcrafted HTML. So I started blogging in 2014, um, and back then, I mean, Hugo didn't exist. Medium, I think, didn't exist or barely existed. Things like that. So I set up like I didn't even know how to use Git, and so I set up a home server, like literally a Linux server that I repurposed an old computer into at home, and I plugged it into my home internet, and then I served websites out of that server, like a random Linux box, and I would install Dropbox on that computer and Dropbox on my computer, and I would drop like literal HTML files into the Dropbox share so that my computer would get it, and then I would have a little shell script that synced that over to like the folder that it was being served out of. So it was a super jank setup, but it worked for me for a year or so. Um, and that was the original website, and these posts are carried over from there. And then eventually, I had a slightly newer version that was like a better looking version of the same HTML dump. And then eventually, I used Medium for a little bit, and then got to really not liking Medium because of all the stuff they put on top of your writing. And then now I'm here, and I've been using this I think for a year and a half or so,
Okay.
to good success. Um, and then so I've had this for a while, and then once I made the programming language called Ink, I wanted to do more technical blogging, and this was just kind of a convenient place to put that kind of stuff. And so this came about, and this design actually I think happened before this site got its latest redesign, but that's how this site came about. And then this one I made over the summer in 2020 because I was in quarantine like everyone else, and I was doing a lot more sort of free creative writing, and I was finding myself wanting wanting of a place to put stuff that didn't have the pressure to like be long form super polished stuff that I was putting on here. So this is a more rougher sketch. Um, and it's supposed to be kind of like a typewriter feel, and so there's like a typewriter up here, um, and all the text is monospace. But yeah, there you can see like all the headers kind of like are in the same position, and like you can see kind of under the hood it's semi a shared code base. It's actually shared out of um, this template called Carlisle that I made, which is a Hugo template. That's like a version of this website. But the other sites are all forked versions of this template. So those are the three websites. And they all kind of look like this. I mean, they're Hugo sites all sort of look similar, but like this is my main website. This is Vim, by the way, is the editor of choice that I usually use. But like, let's see. So these are all the posts. There's quite a bit here. These are all the posts that I've ever written. A post looks like this. So this is my like 2020 goals post. And then I usually don't edit or don't draft them in Vim because that'd be kind of silly. I use an app called IA Writer to write them. But obviously I put them, I do like a final pass in Vim. And then layouts contains the actual template. All of this is like handwritten by me, so I don't use someone else's template because I like having, in general, a theme in my projects is I like to have as much control as possible over over things. And so in this case, that's good because it means that the resulting website's really clean and really small and really fast, and things like that. So that is the main website.
And so yeah. When you're like drafting up a post, you'll just kind of start doing that in IA Writer. Do you tend to like work on one draft at a time, or just do you have like a big folder of unfinished things? Or
yeah, I've also written about my writing process here. Gotcha. But basically anytime I have so I can show you my IA Writer. Probably it's probably nothing too embarrassing in there. Here's a rant that I'm working on about how people should write longer sentences. But basically anytime I have an idea, I will drop it into IA Writer if I think it has a chance of becoming like a blog post. And then when I have 2 or 3 hours free, I'll come back and sort of like pick an idea that I feel like is ready. Because usually I have an idea and then I'll like talk to people about it. And maybe it like simmers in my head for a little bit. And then like it develops into an idea that's like sort of fleshed out and full enough that I feel like I can write a blog post about it and kind of sit down and write it in one sitting. And so probably the next time I have a couple hours free, I'll come back and turn this into like a 500 word piece or something like that. And then once I do that, I like to read things aloud to myself when I write. So I will, there's like one of the things I like about IA is there's like a preview mode here. So I'll usually turn this on and I'll like read it aloud to myself a couple times to revise, and then I'll copy it over to Vim and then that results in like an actual preview on my website. Then I'll read that over one final time. And if it looks good, I'll push it live. And push it live means put it on my hosting is a whole different thing that I'll get to later, but I have a couple of DigitalOcean servers where I run all my projects. So that's where I put the website.
I figured you'd have moved off of the old Linux computer.
Yeah, the Linux computer is actually still in my room. I just use it as my like main Linux box at the moment. So yeah. Cool. So that's the actual blog. There's actually not a lot of fanciness in here. Like even all of this is all text. My like mini resume and all the stuff. It's all text, and I made it intentionally this way because I don't like bike shedding my website. Like I know a lot of people have a lot of fun and learn a lot from like yearly revamping of their websites, and I don't know. I personally like spend enough time making all of these things that I feel like I don't really need to bike shed my own website for me to learn about new stuff. So I try to make this text heavy so I can just like revise it if I need to and update it on occasion without having to like upgrade to the latest version of Vue or whatever. This email, I guess we can start here on project. So this email subscription thing is also custom. I briefly thought about like, I know button down email is a thing that I've heard a lot of good things about. Substack is obviously the elephant in the room, but I could have a custom solution, so why not? Oh no, that's not the one that I want to open. This is. So this is a mailing list manager that I wrote myself. It's written in Go, like a lot of my backend projects. It sort of looks like this on the back end. All it literally does is I can post it a new subscriber, and then there's like an interface in here where I can like write new emails. And like I can choose which list to send it to. It's super, super simple. But usually what I'll do is I'll write the newsletter, which I send out weekly somewhere else. And then I'll type these details in and copy paste it here. I usually actually send it to this test list, which is just me once to test it out. And then I'll send it to the rest of the list. And this, I love it because it's so simple.
Yeah.
Compared to like, I haven't used Substack. But Substack seems similar, but I've used MailChimp before all this newsletter stuff was.
Compared to MailChimp, this is, yeah.
This is so much simpler. And it's faster and it works. And it works with Mailgun under the hood. So I have,
Gotcha.
I can have logs and things like that, which is good. So that's the way that I send email.
What was the order of operations in like, I want to have a mailing list to, I'm going to make a little mailing list backend project?
Oh, it wasn't a big decision. Well, so it wasn't a big decision because I'm used to making my own setup for stuff, and a mailing list is like you have one job, and so it's not a complex project.
Yep.
Literally all it needs to do is like, I need to give it some text and it's to turn that into HTML, and then it needs to like post it to an API endpoint that Mailgun has. So that like, it's actually not too complicated.
Yep.
But yeah, that's the mailing list project. I guess I can go down the rest of the highlights, which is sort of my bigger projects.
Yeah, I think some of the front end ones would be interesting, like Ink and Taurus, and yeah.
So I guess I kind of just like go down this list and look at the coding ones. So Ink is probably the like longest running project, if you want to look at it that way, that I've worked on, because it's a whole programming language. So I started working on this in 2019 over the summer to like learn how programming languages worked. And it's turned into, initially it was kind of just an education project, but it's turned into like an actual language that I use to build things, which is kind of cool. This is sort of what it looks like. You can go read about it on the website. But it's like sort of JavaScripty with some like weird Go stuff thrown in. But it's super lightweight. The interpreter is written in Go, and I haven't really changed it much since I've written it, but I've written interpreters for the same language and a couple other languages just to learn those languages. But it's a whole language, and I like that I kind of use it for other things, which I'll probably get to. But yeah, that's a language that I wrote and I use for other things. And then I have one of my shticks is that in addition to the mailing list, I have like a notes app and a to-do list app and like a weird calendar integration and a bunch of other productivity stuff written in that. Some of it's in that language, some of it is in Go, but I've written all of them in up DIY style. So I don't use like Notion or Roam or any of the stuff. And I use the tools that I sort of designed for myself that work for my workflow. And some of that is written in Ink. Some of it is in this mega code base or monorepo of tools. This contains like, I can't show you like a running version because it has some private stuff, but it contains like a Dropbox clone, and then on top of the directory that Dropbox clone shares across all my computers, lives my notes app and some of the other stuff. Taurus is a UI library that I wrote a couple years ago that sort of has like a reactive feel to it because of the way that you render declaratively the UI, but it doesn't do like the it's not like a UI runtime. It doesn't do like all the concurrent stuff or any of the crazy like state management. It's purely class based if you know React, and it just helps with rendering. But it has this like little fun documentation site that you can go and you can look at sort of this like super annotated version of the source code. And this, as a side note, this annotation generator is also something that I wrote while I was writing Taurus. But yeah, this library is useful because basically every front end project I make, I use this library for a few reasons. The main ones being like, this is smaller and less complicated than React. And I've used React before, but this is literally like just a script tag that you can drop into a document, and I like that. It doesn't require a compiler or anything like that. And it doesn't have breaking updates because I'm the one releasing updates, as opposed to React. React is actually pretty good with not breaking stuff with updates, but
You
NPM,
never know.
the Node ecosystem in general is sort of
Bit of a
question mark. Yeah.
side question, but how does the annotated source code work? Is that just like extracted from comments, or
Yeah. So, oh no, I don't have a short link to that one. I should talk about the short link system. So this is the tool. This I wrote this a long time ago. At this point, I guess the last update was 2 years ago. So this is like a node little CLI. This is the thing that generates the documentation. How it works is actually I should just go here. How it works is if you look at like a source file, there are comments that start with like / angle bracket like this. So what this tool does is it looks at a source file, it extracts out all the comments that start with this, takes this block and parses it as markdown, and then puts it on the left side. And then the result is that you get like really cleanly annotated code like this. And you can see this is sort of parsed markdown. And you can have like, if you scroll down a little bit, you can have like headers and all kinds of stuff. And then it's syntax highlighted on the right. I got this from this was inspired by Backbone, which I used for a long time. They have an annotated version of the source code which looks very similar, and I always enjoyed reading through this API when I was using it. And so I kind of took the same idea and implemented it myself with line numbers and extra things that are nicer.
Yeah, I know the Rust document generator tool has like a markdown support in its comment extraction stuff. That's really cool. But the sort of line specific annotations is also pretty sick.
Yep. So that's Rust. And then this is a more recent project of mine. It's a Twitter client, which again I can't show you because there's some private stuff on there. But this is what it looks like. You can go read about it on my blog. But basically, the idea behind it is like instead of having just one home timeline, I can have multiple different timelines that I'm looking at with random filters, and I can change the filter to look at like filter like all tweets on Twitter by minimum or maximum number of likes, when things were written, who it was by, what kind of things it mentions, what kind of things it doesn't mention, whether it's images or not, all that kind of stuff. And I have like a nice collection of channels that I use to like explore Twitter at this point, which is kind of nice. And I feel like I'm more in control of what I'm getting like spoon fed from Twitter than just the main Twitter app. So it's a Twitter client. On the right side, it has some like analytic stuff. This thing is written in ink, which I think is kind of cool because in order to integrate with Twitter, I had to not only write like the backend app itself, but also write like a full implementation of the SHA hash and HMAC, the message signing format algorithm, which was not trivial. Because I had to do that because I can't use a library because there's no libraries because I made the language. But this is a Twitter client that I use, and I think is kind of just a fun project.
This one strikes me as sort of like a chunkier project than like the mailing list one or other things like that. Yeah. Is the sort of design process or iteration loop drastically different for it, or?
Yeah, this one was a chunkier project. I wanted to get it right. So this is actually the design file that I used to mock this out. I used Adobe XD. I've been people have attempted to move me over to Figma, and I haven't taken the bait yet. But this was the original design that I had, which is pretty close, but there's like a little more empty space, and I'm not super exact about my design. It's more about getting the aesthetics right. But I wanted I wanted something that was like really space efficient and easy to parse and not super distracting. Because Twitter, one of my issues with Twitter is like they started out as just a text website, and then over time they've added things to their app so that fewer and fewer tweets fit in a single screen over time. And like now you open the Twitter app and it's like maybe a half a tweet if it has an image, which I just didn't like. So I went for a space efficiency. This view ended up not getting implemented, but like here's the mobile version that I tested out. And So this was the thing that I had, and then you can see sort of like what my initial idea was here for the app, which obviously evolved. But yeah, that was the design, and then I sort of fleshed it out. And the front end for this is written in Taurus, and the back end is written in Ink. And it was a more kind of chunkier project, I think. But I think it took me like 2 weeks to do it, which I think is on the longer side for me. Because typically projects for me take like, on the shorter side, like 6 to 8 hours, on the longer side, like a weekend. So that's the Twitter client. This is a couple of like albums that I've written, not technical, but you can go listen to them if you want. I play piano. Night Vale, also not super interesting, but I guess I'll show it. So if you're familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, so okay, this actually requires a pretext. Because I just love writing languages so much, and Lisp is great. KLisp is variant of Lisp that's written in Ink. So it's a Lisp interpreter written in Ink. So it's like an interpreter sitting on top of an interpreter. But it's a Lisp interpreter, and Lisp, if you haven't used it, is like it's just a fun language to work on and work in because it sort of grows with you over time as you use it. It's hard to describe, but it's not, there isn't a learning curve so much as like a growing curve, because you can sort of build up patterns and macros and things like that you like to use over time as you use language. So this was kind of just a fun project to like make a Lisp interpreter. And then this one has a Lisp interpreter inside of it, but it's like Jupyter Notebook, but with Lisp as the language of choice. And so I can do like, oh, I forget what the syntax of the language was, but I can do like the first 100 numbers, and it's 50-50. So this is sort of like Jupyter Notebook. These are markdown blocks that you can write, and you have like LaTeX blocks that you can put in for equations and stuff. And the backend for this is also written in Ink, and I just wanted like a little computational notebook environment to mess around in, and so that's what this is. Not super particularly conceptually interesting, but I think it's like I like having little kind of thinking environments or note-taking environments to work in, and that was a good example of that. This is more fun. It's Reddit, but in newspaper format, if you haven't seen it. This was one of my more popular projects, I think, last year. It just takes the front page of Reddit, or whatever subreddit you want, and turns it into format of like a printed New York Times front page. And this is kind of what it looks like. I actually use this reader fairly often because this one is way better for viewing image-heavy subreddits than actual Reddit, because on actual Reddit you have to like, I use old style Reddit, so you have to open every single like thing and open close, and this one you can just kind of take it in. So like
it's interesting seeing the social media clients sort of like evolving or taking the like, or growing whatever the app is into the direction it most wants to be, right? Like Reddit as a super image heavy thing, and Twitter as like this dense text heavy.
Right, or at least a reflection of the way that I like to use those things, which I think is sort of occasionally people ask me if I want to like run these things as SaaS apps that other people can use, and I usually don't. And one of there's like a bunch of reasons for it, but one of the main reasons is that if I have other people start using it, then it would start becoming what was useful to other people instead of what was useful to me, which is great. And if that's what I want to do, but I want them to be really tailored to my use cases, and so I try to keep it to myself. The other reason is if other people are using it, depending on it, that I can't like shut it down and change it willy-nilly, which is kind of what I want to do sometimes. But has
that happened to some projects? Just shut down or archive them and never to look back?
Oh yeah, totally. Like previous versions of the Notes app. I guess that's it. I don't really shut down too many things, but okay. I like having the option. And there have definitely been previous versions of like productivity apps that I've built new versions of, and the old versions have shut down. This is an older project. it's just kind of an in-browser code editor that's like live. So like I can edit stuff here, and then it pops up in here. Actually, I can pop this up in a new editor. And there's a bunch of templates you can start with down here. Like this one's kind of cool because it's just a canvas you can draw on, and here's the JavaScript for it. And you can edit stuff on the right, and you can mess with stuff on the left. And then you can kind of publish it and send links to people. So it's I made this initially. This was actually, I think, the very first project that I ever wrote in Taurus, I think in early 2019. And I made it because I wanted like a nice place where I can, like a sandbox where I can experiment with like random bits of JavaScript without having to use like a huge heavy solution like Code Sandbox, which takes forever to load and is really slow, even though it has a lot of good stuff. And so this is super fast because it literally all it does is it has an HTML section, a JavaScript section, and it like concatenates them together and loads it up in like an iframe on the left. But that is the thing that I made. And actually, when I made it, you'll notice that like these buttons are kind of interesting. They kind of depress when you mouse over them, and then like if you click on it, it moves. And a lot of people liked this visual style. And so I turned it into a CSS library, which is called blocks.css, that I also use in a bunch of my other projects. But it's like themable. Here's a bunch of other projects by me and other people that use it. Like this is one. It's a quiz for Taylor Swift lyrics. Here's this is another one that uses it that I made. It's a fake email service that somehow got to #1 on Product Hunt. But yeah, this is a CSS library that just came out of the CodeFrame project because people liked the visual style, and I kind of use it for other things.
Is that an evolution that happens generally, like you'll try something out in one project specifically before abstracting it out? Or like I mentioned, Ink sort of started out as an abstract thing that then got used in other projects.
It happens often enough. It's not a conscious thing that I try to do, but it happens often enough. In this case, it was not my idea, but I was rooming with one of my friends, Samarth, at the time in San Francisco because I was interning at a company there. And he was like, "Oh, I want to use that style. You should pull it out into a library because I would use it." And I was like, "Okay, let's do it." So that was sort of spurred by someone else, but yeah, that happens pretty often, I think. This is kind of cool. This is actually, I think, super basic, as you can tell from the design, but I think it's conceptually interesting. What it is I like to travel and I like taking pictures, but sometimes pictures aren't enough. So these are recordings of ambient sounds. So I bet there's some here from Brooklyn.
Nice.
Yeah. So I can go down and like listen to what like being there sounded like, and I have a little detail of like why I went there and things like that. And here's a kind of a full list of locations. Wow, that's very loud.
Yeah, I imagine this is something that's probably languished a little bit in the last year, but
oh yeah, definitely. But yeah, it's sometimes occasionally I go here to just kind of reminisce. And I think it's just kind of a cool project.
Yeah.
Conceptually, and so I keep it around. It's called Sounds from Places. This is another programming language project. It's language that reads like clickbait, but it actually works. This is one of my shorter kind of lightning projects. I think I did it in like 8 hours. But yeah, it's a full language, and like you can run code in it, which I think is kind of fun. And here are all the keywords, which my search history did not look very pretty while making this, but there we are. So those are the main projects that I think a lot of people talk about, and there's a bunch of like a stupid number of other ones. Yeah, I can keep going down this list unless there's other things that we want to dig into.
I mean, I have a couple like sort of high level questions, and then maybe we can go back into the small stuff and get
Sure.
into that. One is that, like you mentioned earlier, with sort of the personal productivity stuff, that is like, well, contains a lot of personal information, so you couldn't, you know, share here.
Yeah.
But like, how do you think about the like public-private divide when making and sharing these projects? Because you have, I mean, so much out there already, and then, yeah.
Public-private divide. I mean, I like to share what I can because
Okay.
I think I default to open, and I close things down if I default to open, and sometimes I close things down if I have to, which usually means my notes and information about other people I can't obviously put in the open.
Yep.
But all the tools and all the code that I use, even if I think people won't use it themselves, like a lot of the tools that I make are written in ink, and I until very recently I didn't realize that people would try to run a language just so they can run a tool. Until I wrote the Twitter client, and then someone was like, "Can I wrap this in a Docker container so people who don't have this language installed can use it?" And I was like, "Go for it." And so a bunch of people now sort of use it, which is actually really frightening because it means that my little dinky interpreter that I wrote like 2 years ago is now running on other people's computers, and it somehow hasn't crashed, which is kind of a miracle. But so I try to default to open source code regardless of whether I think other people are going to like run it or not, because it's, I think, kind of just cool to look at how things work. But data is a lot harder to share. There is this thing, which is like a filtered version of my notes that is searchable. So if I want to look at like what my notes are, say, about creativity, here's a bunch of notes that contain the word creative that I can look at. And these are from like books that I've read, conversations that I've had with people, random other events that I've gone to where I've taken notes, going back all the way to like 3 or 4 years ago. There's 1,000 or so little notes in it. So this is like an example of like an open piece of data. Not everything is like that, sadly, but
and so that would be built on top of the same Dropbox-esque data store.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and then this is like a CRM. My room light is odd. This is the actual CRM that I use. I used to have just a text file where I would like it would be a bulleted list of people, and then that got way out of hand. So I had to build this app that sort of formalized that system. And I like the reason this is different from like a normal contacts app is it's because there's more space. Some people who are sort of work in sales have a much more fleshed out CRM, and I don't need like pipelines and anything like that because I'm not trying to sell it with anything. But I do want to keep track of like what I know about people and what I remember about people and what we talked about. And so this is sort of an in-between stage of kind of CRM. And it's fast, it's written in Taurus. It's just kind of what I use. This is from earlier this year, I believe. Yeah, earlier last year at this point, 2020. This is yeah, one of the more useful things that I've built, I think, because I use it really frequently. I think there's like a little over 200 people currently in my actual list. It is, I guess, no longer a prototype, but this thing is still there. But yeah, in general, public-private, I default to open unless I have to keep it private.
So with the sort of dependency tree of your projects, how often do you end up like working on something like Mirat, and then as a result running into, I don't know, some frustrations and then changing something in Taurus? Do things flow down that way, or is working on those two separate things like a separate
that's a really good question. So it happens. It happens more frequently the less exercised the underlying tools are. So when I initially wrote Taurus, you can probably look at the commit history. When I initially wrote Taurus, it contained all the features I thought it would need. And it turns out a bunch of features in it I didn't need, and a bunch of features in it, the bunch of features it didn't have that I wanted. So a lot of this is boring, but if you go to older tweets or older commits, there's other random bug fixes that I make just because I found them when I was when I was using it for, I guess I can't find them on demand, but they're random fixes that I made because I discovered a bug while I was like writing an app, or because while I was working on an app, I needed this feature, or it was too slow and I had to speed it up. So towards the beginning of when I started using this for things, that ended up happening. And over time, the feature set that I needed personally from the library kind of stabilized. And so I haven't had to add anything new to this in a while. Same with Ink. This has now been running for, I think, over almost 2 years. And so like specifically, I think I had to yeah, like I had to add some built-in functions for me to be able to like work with file trees and directories and things like that. And those are added because of necessity, because of the projects that I was using it in. I try not to do it because the context switch is really jarring, and it means I like to always work on one project at a time, but it means that I'm working on this thing and then I have to go back and like actually have 2 projects open, which I find really disconcerting. So I try not to do it, but I've had to do it. I've had to do it less and less over time with Ink 2. There's a couple things that I think it should still have, like being able to read environment variables and what's the other one? I forget. But there's a couple things that I'd like to add before I really like call it done. But this one's also pretty complete. I haven't had to add anything new in a while.
I imagine you don't use like GitHub issues for tracking all these to-dos and stuff like that, right? Is there something you've built that has the global view of all the things you'd like to do on all these projects, or is that just cached in your
I use GitHub issues sometimes. Okay. Oh, I should talk about the URL shortener. Oh, I'm not logged in. Darn. Because I'm usually on Safari and I'm on Chrome because I don't want you to see my browser history. But I use GitHub issues. Normally what I do actually is I use the README as kind of a scratchpad.
Okay.
So there's a project that I'm working on called Matterhorn, which is a structural editor. And it's not public yet, so you can't look at it, which is I'm opening inside Vim and not Chrome. But this is the README. And these are just random ideas that I've dumped into this doc before I actually get to work on it, because this project is barely started. But random ideas that I've had, I've just kind of throw it into this README. For when I actually start working on it, I can start picking up these ideas and chewing on them. So I sometimes use the README for to-dos if it's project specific. Other sort of larger to-dos or things that are not as specific to single projects go sit in my to-do list.
Gotcha.
Which now I actually kind of want to show. Oh, this is okay. So this is actually one of the other things is I have a directory in my home directory called source, and that's where all my GitHub repos live. And so these are all my GitHub repos that I've is that what I want to do? Oh, wait, what is it that I want to do? Why won't it start? Isn't this a Node app? I feel like this is a Node app. Interesting. Do I just have to do? I forget how my own thing works. I think it's source. Oh, it's a Go app. That must mean this is what I want to do. Never mind. Maybe try it later.
What is Pico?
Oh, Pico is my to-do list.
Okay. Gotcha.
Actually, in my work now.
That looks promising.
Mac OS updating has messed up a lot of my C headers. What port do I want to look at? Oh, 9110. Okay, so this is my to-dos. It's really, really terse because nobody else needs to know how to use it. But like usually what I have is I have an inbox here, and then I have like a newsletter section here. And these are just collapsible little sections. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll just be like feed my dog. I don't have a dog. Finish. Matterhorn. Get back to Jack about the project. I don't know. Usually the way that I use it is this is kind of a scratch pad for my like everyday to-dos. And then if I have a weekly newsletter and one of the sections in it is like what I've done that week, and I usually forget. And so if I like publish a project, I'll be like published GitHub / use Matterhorn. Or if I've written a blog post, I'll say like on my main website, I published how I side project. Or on my coffee site, I published something about Sketch. These usually respond to like correspond to URLs that these are sort of like shorthands that I have for myself, but put things in newsletters or to-do lists. And the immediate reaction that some people have to this is like, well, why isn't this like a list? Why is it just like a text box? So I used to have a list. I used to use Todoist for my to-do system. But what I realized is the way that I use the to-do list app was actually more as a document instead of like a list, because what I would do is I would make like an item and then I would use the comment section to add a bunch of detail. What I really want to do is probably just like have like a thing that I want to do and like add a bunch of detail here. So it's like right in front of me instead of having to click into a bunch of different list items. And so this is actually closer, I think, to how I think about how I want to keep, like I want to have this is the metaphorical analog of like having a piece of paper that's on my desk where I just write stuff down. And so this is how I do my to-dos, and this is where all the unfinished stuff that doesn't sit on GitHub issues goes to.
Gotcha. And this is just where like in Pico, where is this data then being stored?
Oh, there's it's a cheap solution. It saves all of this data gets sent back as a single JSON blob.
Okay.
Because this is usually not very long. It's usually under a kilobyte of data.
Yeah.
So it gets sent back under as a JSON blob, and it just sits on the file system on the server. And that's actually how a lot of my, not a lot, but a decent number of my apps work. Is like, it actually turns out it's not, if you have a single user that doesn't generate a lot of data, JSON is actually not a bad data format. If you're confident that your disk will not screw up. But otherwise, I've also used SQLite before, which I think is better if you need to run queries over your data.
Yep. Yeah, that might be a good segue into, you mentioned talking about hosting earlier. So
yes.
Yeah.
I have a post on this as well, which I think is how I set up my servers. I have like, I guess, two different kinds of projects. I have static sites that don't really require hosting, and then I have things that require backends. So I use mostly 3 different languages on the backend: Go, Node, and Ink for dynamic stuff. For static stuff, I just generate it and I use Vercel to deploy it usually, which I've been a user for a long time. They made some mistakes in the past, but I like them. They deprecated their old API, which I really loved, and now they have like a new one that's like harder to use.
Yep.
But I'm a big fan of their static hosting, so I use them for like Linus Coffee sits on it. So that's good. And then for things that require backends, I have a single $5 a month DigitalOcean server with $1 a month backup that contains basically all of my projects, which surprisingly, like they all like 20 something of them fit. That require backends fit on there, which I'm really grateful for, because it actually doesn't cost a lot of money. But like, this is how I set up all my language environments. It's not actually very complicated. I've always wanted to figure out a way to make this environment like, what's the word? To be able to like spin this up programmatically. I have like I don't have any kind of abstraction over on top of it. I don't have like a Docker image or anything like that. I just have like the backup image that I can restore from. I would like to get to a place where I have that kind of stuff set up, but it's not been a priority because it hasn't happened before, and I anticipate it not to happen. I just have to like upgrade the Ubuntu version every like 4 years, which I think is good for me.
And when you deploy a project to it, are you just SSHing in, pulling down from the Git repo, and restarting a server? Or
yeah. Let me see if I can show you that too. I think it can. I don't think there's like any super secret information on there. So actually, yeah. So this is the server. Here's some projects. So these are node projects that are running.
Okay.
One, it stopped because it eats up a lot of CPU, but I keep forgetting to talk about the URL shortener. I should get to that next. It's just, it pops up everywhere because it's so pervasive in my life, but I forget about it because I've been using it for a while. But here's the node projects. The Go projects are like run as systemd processes. So they're like you have to query them like systemctl status. I think it's, is that the command? I got the bad order. I always forget the order.
Yeah, systemd is tricky.
Yeah, this is my Twitter client. It's like you can see how much RAM it's eating up and like how long it's been running, things like that. And there's a bunch of other ones that are like these are all the services that are running on here. Most of these are Go, some of these are Ink. This is just a script that I have that I run occasionally to update everything.
Nice.
Yeah, this is a server. So whenever I want to deploy something, I SSH into here. I like cd into a directory. I git pull, and then I like restart the server, which is what I do. I should talk about
URL shortener.
The URL shortener.
Yeah.
Which is this thing. So this is one of my older projects. This is, I can just show you what it looks like. It looks like this. So it started out as a URL shortener, but I also wanted to be able to save notes to myself. So what you can do is it's password protected because it has to be. It initially wasn't, and then it turns out like there are a lot of scammers on the internet. So I can put in like, I want it to be like, let us set zone / I don't know, Zoom is like one that I have for my Zoom link. So I paste in like what I want the URL to be, a password, whatever URL I want it to go to, or I can put in like a markdown bit of text. And if it's a URL, then it just does a redirect. If it's a bit of markdown, it renders it as markdown. So actually I have a URL at linus.latest that just hosts my latest issue of the newsletter. And every time I send the newsletter, I just paste the draft in here. And this is just where the thing sits for a week. And this is literally just a markdown. So like if I go to edit this, this is literally just markdown pasted at this URL. And it works. It's just hosted markdown rendering. This is actually super useful because occasionally people will like ask me a question that like over text that requires like some words to answer, and I don't want to cram it into like a tiny iMessage text box. And so I just draft it in here. I send the link to them, and then they can read and reference it later.
Nice.
Which is nice. So I use this all the time for a bunch of different things. And then I also use the redirect thing all the time for like all of my projects have a redirect. A lot of my a lot of my like personal little workflows are involve like following quick redirects because it's so much faster to type than like full URLs, and I don't really use bookmarks. What I found is like a lot of my friends that are in the industry that I talk to and might want to collaborate on tend to have like different kinds of builder philosophies to what I like. Where my philosophy tends to be like really minimalist and sort of like bare bones in a good way, hopefully. And whereas I think a lot of people are used to working with like a super rich set of tools and like install like 200 megabytes of JavaScript, which has its benefits, but it's not typically my style. And so there's maybe like workflow differences and things like that have to be reconciled. I guess I haven't tried it too much, but I haven't. So I guess the answer to your question is I haven't collaborated too much. I'm open to it, but usually, especially depending on the project, it doesn't always lend itself too nicely to like roping in someone else to work on something for myself. Hey, Jared, you're back.
Thanks for answering the question.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, my internet crapped out at an inopportune moment.
Oh no, it's okay. I was just answering some questions from the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, there was one in there that I don't know if you got into, but was around like, given that you have a sort of your own little universe of projects and dependencies, how do you think about if you do like learning in the wider world of, or like in the like not so nice way of phrasing it, I think, is like staying relevant or like keeping up with trends, but just in terms of like new information coming in.
So I think there's a difference between having experience using something and understanding something. And you can have one without the other on both sides.
Yep.
And I think what I strive for is with technologies that I don't use but are seem relevant, I try to have a really deep understanding of them. But I don't think it's necessary to have really deep experiences with them. So like a good example is React. Well, actually, that's a bad example. A good example is like Rust. I've used Rust a little bit. I've written like an interpreter in it, but it's not one of my like main languages that I go to a lot. But it seems quite relevant. And so I've read a bunch about Rust and I've watched a bunch of talks about Rust, and I feel like I can sort of at a theoretical level tell you a lot about Rust, but I obviously haven't used it too much, so I can't. If I try to write something in Rust, I'll run into a lot of compiler errors, which I think is totally fine. And I think like if you have a good baseline understanding of how these systems work at like a low conceptual level, then it's actually, I think, relatively easy to pick that thing up and figure out how to use it relatively quickly. If you need to like, use it at a job or something. Same with React. I had known about React for a long time. I didn't use it day to day until I joined the company that used it, and I was able to get to speed pretty quickly because I was familiar with sort of the fundamentals. What I try to spend a lot of time on are like not specific tools per se, but understanding fundamentals. So like understanding fundamentals of like how programming languages and compilers work, of like how the CPU works, assembly, all the way up to like basic stuff. Like I can tell you in pretty excruciating detail how like JavaScript works, even if I'm not like a React ninja. I'm okay at React, but I'm not like, I don't know it as well as I know my own framework. But I think that's okay, because if I need to use it, then I have like a good comprehensive understanding of the rest of the layers of the stack to be able to pick up React really quickly. And so I try to optimize for that instead of like learning all the tools, because tools change out really quickly, but the things that endure are understandings of the core systems that underlie them.
And so do you see those sort of like that process of getting the understanding and excruciating detail of JavaScript as a separate practice of yours from the tool building and side project doing, or are they intertwined?
It's mostly a separate task, but I like reading about this stuff, but so I don't feel like it's a responsibility or like an extra thing that I have to do. I just kind of do it because I think it's interesting, and the way that like you read like, I don't know, a blog if you think it's interesting. Sometimes, so part of it is I'll run into like interesting blog posts about like how V8 optimizes JavaScript, and I'll like read it. Part of it is like, especially for some of the more technical projects like Taurus, like when I was building Taurus, I spent a lot of time on optimizations and speeding things up. And so I spent a lot of time not just reading about, but like trying things and measuring things. And so I have a lot of firsthand knowledge of like how to optimize DOM operations, batch DOM operations in JavaScript.
Yeah.
That's just like knowledge that I've gathered from my building this stuff. And I think that's also quite important because JavaScript is one of those like foundational technologies that I think won't go anywhere for a while. So yeah, always bet on JavaScript. So I would say, like I read a lot and I just out of like, because I think it's interesting, but there's also definitely a little bit of like knowledge that I've gained from building these things. A great example is one of the more recent project of mine, which is August, which is an assembler. This is purely a pedagogical project, so I'm not going to assemble anything serious with it, but I wanted to learn how assembly worked. And so this takes an assembly file like this, and it generates an elf binary that you can run on your computer. So I'm like writing an executable file byte by byte. I can tell you what every byte does in that file, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, I learned a lot about assembly and x86 and how CPUs work and how like operating systems run executable files. Building this because I had to build it from the ground up.
And so it sounds like that appreciation for learning the fundamentals of a thing is sort of like ever present in both the kinds of projects you do, what you do in those projects, and what you read and research on the side.
Yeah, I think so, because it's, I don't know, it's satisfying to know how things work. Yeah. And I guess Ink started out that way too. I wanted to learn how interpreters worked, and now I use it.
Yeah. Awesome. We're just past the hour, so unless there are any burning questions anyone else has, or something you really wanted to talk about that we didn't get to yet. Yeah.
I don't think I have anything burning. If anyone else any questions.
So do you take a different approach when you work on a pedagogical project versus like something you would use yourself, like more like a product wise? Like,
oh, that's a good question. Do I take a different approach? I mean, I think I sort of necessarily do, because with things for projects that I would actually use, and they're not mutually exclusive always, but because Ink was a pedagogical project, but I ended up using it too. But with projects that I'm going to use, I usually know exactly what I want to build. And I design it from, I design it right from the get-go, and I sort of like just draft it out, like building out a rough draft. So like Lucerne is a great example. I knew exactly what I wanted to build, and I knew what I wanted to look like. So I designed it and I built it in like one go. Pedagogical projects, I think I start more with like, here's what I want to learn and have an understanding of. And I know that in order to do that, I should aim for this to be a thing that I can do with this tool. So like with August, I knew I wanted to learn assembly, and one way to force myself to do that is to like try to build an assembler. But I don't know what that entailed. And so I had to go do a bunch of reading. And so it was a much longer drawn out process. And instead of like spending a weekend building it, I had to like spend like 3 hours or 4 hours every day, like reading a little bit, trying a little bit, and be more accepting of the fact that like sometimes I'll try something and it turns out it's the wrong approach, and I have to scrap the whole thing and start over. And so I think learning projects tend to be much more iterative and like exploratory, instead of like one stroke of the brush and it's done. But beyond that, I think they're similar, because ultimately I want them all to kind of be useful at doing something. I know some people learn really well by like just like building like a to-do app in whatever new language or something like that, but like I have plenty of to-do apps. I don't need to build another to-do app. So I want to build something novel each time. So I try to make learning projects useful. I try to learn something by building the practical projects too, but the ones where I have to learn something new, like the assembler, tend to take longer, and it tends to come in like more iterations, and there tend to be more kind of roadblocks. One thing that I think is important to also keep in mind is for learning projects is if you're learning something new, your first design will probably be terrible, and you just have to accept it. Like Ink was the first interpreter I wrote, and I still use it because it works technically, and it's like correct. But the design of the interpreter under the hood has so many flaws. I was also that was the first major Go project that I wrote, and Go has a bunch of really unique features like channels and Go routines and stuff. So I just went nuts with those features, which is not what you want to do.
Probably really useful for learning channels and Go routines, though.
It was. Yeah. But like one of the like really dumb things it does is I wanted it to be like an incremental parser. And so I have a tokenizer that generates, if you know compilers, if I have a tokenizer that generates tokens like left parenthesis or like identifier or comma or whatever. And I have a channel where one side is tokenizer that pipes all those things through, and the other side is a parser that takes those incrementally and like generates those. And like that's really cool. But like cool, that's so totally not necessary, because most of the time you're not parsing anything that's large enough for that to be a benefit. So Yeah, so that was done, and then I've written other interpreters since that I think are much better designed as a result. And I think it's with learning projects you sort of have to accept that like the first one's going to be poorly designed, and you sort of embrace it.
An interesting thing is, I feel like for a lot of people, a thing that happens is they'll sort of start a project and sort of go through what you described with the incremental parsing thing, where they'll build out a whole thing and then it turns out to not be that useful, and so the project languishes. But because you've sort of scoped it to having this thing that projects are going to be useful and have a specific goal, that sort of happens on a smaller level within the project itself.
Yeah, and I think that is important, that it is something that you want to use and that is useful, because it hopefully is the thing that motivates you to keep going. I don't know. I personally find just like the prospect of like learning something not motivating enough for me to keep working on something. So I needed to be useful in doing something. And that's what keeps me going. Someone asked how I name my projects. I had a tweet about this once. I don't have a really clear defined pattern. I just kind of like, there are some themes. So I've named some projects after months of the week, months of the year. So I have August, September, October. I have some that are named after parts of the world. So Lucerne is one. I have Matterhorn. I have some that are made up words, like Pico. Pico is not a made up word, but it's not an English word. I have some that are sort of like fancy typographical terminology. So it's kind of all over the place, but just whatever sounds good to my ear, and occasionally relevant to the project itself. Yeah, I'll tackle one more question in the chat, and then maybe we can call it a day. Someone asked how often I go back to revise my posts on the blog. Almost never. I've only revised one thing to add a disclaimer that I no longer believe in the things that I said, because I think it was, I don't know, I don't. So one of the things that one of the ways I think about my blog is it's, I mean, I have a lot in here at this point, and each post to me now feels like an iterative piece on top of this like large thing that I'm building. So my actual project is my blog archive. Like this archive is actually what I'm building, and each post is just like an iterative, laying an iterative brick on top of it. Instead of like each piece being a completely new piece. And maybe I'm communicating that poorly, but I think what that means is like, I like that framing because it means that the thing that I'm actually building, the work that I'm actually creating is the blog archive itself. And the older posts have value because they're sort of windows into what I thought about previously and how I was thinking about life in projects previously. And contrasting that with like newer ways of thinking that I've written about, I think are interesting to look at. And so I look at these things sort of as like snapshots in time, and I try not to revise them too much, because then they sort of stop being what I thought of at that time and become evergreen, which is not the way that I try to think about my writing. If I've changed my thoughts on something, then I just write a new post. So I don't revise too much, except like typos and in like specific situations where I'm like, oh, if someone read this, they would really misinterpret what I was saying, and I go back and add a disclaimer. But that's only happened like a couple of times in my like 200 some pieces.
It's really interesting to hear that approach in contrast to the sort of digital garden-y thing that we've had a bunch of people on here who are really exploring that approach with their blogs. And it's interesting that it kind of the creation of this like overall archive is an end goal of both the approaches, right? Where one is sort of doing it incrementally by changing these small pieces, and you're sort of building it with these bigger posts or these individual bricks over time.
Yeah, like snapshots of my brain in time. Yeah, same with projects. This website is sort of my home base, and it's like I try to think of this website as like the actual like large artifice that I'm building, and then other things are sort of hooked into this through hyperlinks. This is like the home base.
Awesome. I lost the chat, so I'm not sure if there are any more questions in there you wanted to get into.
I think that's it. I think those are awesome. What to get to.
Cool. But yeah, thank you so much, Linus. This was a lot of fun and a lot of really interesting things to learn from and think about.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for hosting, Jared. It was a good time.
Yeah. And thanks for coming, everybody.